Hello and welcome to another episode of True Crime, Man's Dark Imagination. I'm your host, Alan G. If you like what you see on this program, check out our other ones as well. Hit the like button, subscribe, and the bell to be informed of any future broadcasts. For over a decade, residents of the great state of Louisiana were thrown into a panic. A serial killer had been stalking southeast Louisiana, and at the height of his crimes, authorities were still no closer to his identity than before. It seemed as though there were so many victims that the killer was in two places at once. Or were there two killers? Charlotte Murray Pace was a 22-year-old girl who had just graduated from Louisiana State University as one of the youngest recipients of an MBA degree. Her family and friends called her Murray. After graduating from LSU, she continued her graduate work with the LSU Alumni Association until her job in Atlanta at the firm of Deloitte & Touche would begin later that summer. On Friday, May 31st, 2002, after leaving her graduate work, Pace washed her newly acquired 1999 BMW at approximately 11:52 a.m. and then went to her Baton Rouge townhouse at 1211 Charlo that she shared with Rebecca Yeager, a close friend for 6 years, to await Rebecca's scheduled 1 p.m. arrival. Pace and Rebecca planned to travel to Alexandria, Louisiana, to attend the wedding of Grace Crouch, a former roommate. When Rebecca arrived at 2 p.m., she found Pace's almost completely nude body lying on the floor between the bedroom door and the bed. She observed blood all over the room, on the furniture, and all over the floor. The bed was made, but the bedspread was blood-soaked. She later also found blood in the kitchen and in the hallway to the bedroom. She saw Pace had many small holes in her chest and stomach, and Pace's throat was cut open. Unable to find the townhouse's portable phone, Rebecca used her cell phone to call a 911 operator and then flagged down a passing police car. Once the CSI arrived on the scene, they immediately noted the excessive amount of blood in the apartment. One of the crime scene technicians found a clothing iron in the bedroom and 4 pieces of plastic, 2 black and 2 blue. The iron was in close proximity to Pace's body. The base of the iron, the heating element, was blood-stained, and the majority of the iron, including the handle and the cord, was missing. After the investigative team gathered the individual pieces of evidence and labeled each according to protocol, they submitted the specimens to the Baton Rouge City Police, who logged them into evidence and sent them to the crime lab for scientific analysis. At the morgue, Dr. Michael Kramer collected sexual assault kit evidence, taking swabbings from the vaginal and anal areas as well as the breasts, and submitting the kit for scientific examination. Dr. Kramer's autopsy report enumerated 81 different wounds to Pace's body and opined that the cause of death was exsanguination. He theorized that 2 patterns of stab wounds were present, one resembling lesions caused by a flat-bladed screwdriver and the other resembling incised wounds from a knife. He also found Pace sustained blunt injuries to the head with a fractured skull and blunt trauma to the eyeballs, together with multiple bruises to the upper and lower extremities. The heart, the liver, and the lungs were perforated 3 times each. There was also a stab wound to the left area of the eyeball that penetrated into the cranial cavity. Dr. Kramer also performed the autopsies of Gina Wilson Green and Kerry Yoder. In addition, there was an impressive wound at the top of the neck with transection of the cartilage, and the esophagus accompanied with a severed left jugular vein. A few days later, an analysis began with the trace evidence found at the Pace apartment. At the time of Pace's rape and murder, there were other unsolved violent rapes and murders of women in the Baton Rouge and Lafayette areas that caused the police to further investigate these homicides. Indeed, sometime later, when the DNA analysts at the State Police Crime Lab compared notes on DNA samples recovered from several victims of these unsolved homicides. It showed that a single perpetrator had committed the unsolved homicides of these women. The perpetrator was thus deemed a serial killer. Because some of these homicides were used at defendant's trial to show identity, motive, plan, system, and intent, we will now set forth the facts of 5 of these homicides the state used at the defendant's trial. On September 24, 2001, 8 months prior to Pace's death, Gina Wilson Green, an attractive, successful registered nurse of 40 years of age, was found strangled and raped just 3 doors away from Murray's townhouse. No signs of forced entry were evident. John Coulter, the lead detective from the East Baton Rouge Parish Sheriff's Office, opined that although Green's body was found in her bed, a struggle appeared to have begun in the hallway. He said that in the hallway there were large stains, later determined to be fecal matter, a clump of hair, and Green's earrings were separated a good distance on the floor. Her shoes were found in different rooms. Crime scene personnel bagged the blouse Green was wearing, logged it into evidence, and submitted it to the crime lab for analysis. Green's shorts, as well as her purse and cell phone, were missing. Through the assistance of Singular Wireless, Green's cell phone provider, police officers recovered these items dumped behind a warehouse on Choctaw Street in Baton Rouge. In addition to those items, the police recovered a kitchen towel that appeared to come from Green's home. On July 9, 2002, Diane Alexander, an attractive nurse, was attacked at her home in Brobridge, about 45 miles west of Baton Rouge in rural St. Martin Parish. On the morning of July 9th, Alexander was getting ready for work when a black man, who identified himself as Anthony, knocked on her locked front door asking for directions to the Montgomerys. When Alexander said she did not know the Montgomerys, the man asked to use the phone. He then asked her if her husband might know the Montgomerys. When she eventually informed him that her husband was not at home, the stranger's demeanor quickly changed. He forced his way into the mobile home and overpowered her. The intruder caught her by the throat, told her not to try anything because he was armed with a knife and that he would poke her in the eye. He then attempted to rape her, but he could not maintain an erection. He then bludgeoned her and attempted to strangle her with a telephone cord he cut from the home computer that was close at hand. Alexander placed her hand between the phone and the cord and her neck in an effort to stop her strangulation. She was passing in and out of consciousness when fortuitously her son, Herman, arrived at the residence. When the intruder heard Herman's car approach on the gravel driveway, the attacker ran out the back door. Herman saw the unfamiliar car at his parents' home. He described it as a gold Mitsubishi Eclipse with a Hampton Has It plate on the front, and further noted it had a dent in the hood. He also observed a beige telephone cord hanging out of the car window. When he entered the home, Herman found his mother on the floor lying in a pool of blood. Alexander had a skull fracture, and she was rushed via helicopter to a Lafayette hospital where she remained for 5 days. Crime scene personnel from St. Martin Parish secured evidence from the scene of the attack. 2 significant items were preserved and logged into evidence for future forensic analysis: the severed end of the telephone cord that was cut from the computer and Alexander's dress with DNA evidence on it. On July 15, 2002, Alexander gave a detailed description of her attacker to Detective Arthur Boyd of the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office. Through her description, a composite sketch of the attacker was made. The evidence from this crime scene and the sketch, which bore a striking resemblance to the defendant, would later become vital in resolving who the perpetrator was in the unsolved homicides of the women in the Baton Rouge and Lafayette areas. Despite the existence of this sketch, at this time, the investigation leads were focused on an unknown white male driving a white pickup truck. Just 3 days after Alexander's attack, Pamela Piglia Kinnemore, a beautiful 40-year-old antique shop owner, was reported missing from her Baton Rouge home. On July 12, 2002, Kinnemore's husband, Byron, arrived at their home in Briarwood Place at about 11:45 p.m. He found a full bathtub, spots of blood on a bedroom rug, and a minor disheveling of the bedroom furniture. His wife, Pam, was not at home. 3 days later, on July 16, 2002, a survey crew found a body just south of Whiskey Bay exit on Interstate 10. Crime scene investigators also found a piece of telephone cord a few hundred feet away from the body. Later, forensic analysis would match this piece of cord to that cut from the home of Diane Alexander 3 days earlier. The body, which had been exposed to 3 days of summer heat, was initially unidentifiable. Only through use of the dental records was the body identified as that being of Pamela Piglia Kinnamore. An autopsy revealed that Kinnamore had been strangled and had 3 significant cut wounds that were evident in her neck. These neck wounds cut through the skin, the windpipe below the larynx, and the opening of the airway, and opened the right carotid artery of both jugular veins. A sexual assault kit was also utilized because there was physical evidence of forceful penetration of the vagina and the anus. Defensive injuries were seen on Kinnamore's left hand, the right hand, the left elbow, the back of the forearm, the back of the arm, and the knees. Vaginal swabbings were obtained during the autopsy and turned over to the crime lab for forensic analysis. Through scientific testing, a DNA profile was procured. Although the profile did not produce a complete set of markers because of the body degradation, it was sufficiently extensive to genetically identify Kinnamore's attacker as the same person who murdered Green and Pace. Thereafter, police officials realized they were looking for the same perpetrator in multiple murders, and a multi-agency homicide task force was formed in August 2002 to track the killer. On November 21, 2002, Ternisha Dene Colombe, an attractive 23-year-old woman, disappeared from her Lafayette home. Her car, purse, and keys were found. 3 days later, a hunter found Colombe's body in the woods near Scott, Louisiana. She was wearing a t-shirt, bra, socks, and tennis shoes. Investigators found a pair of fleece pants and a pair of underwear in the underbrush near the body. A pool of blood about 30 feet from the body was found, and there was evidence the body was dragged through the mud to where it was found by the hunter. A forensic pathologist determined Colombe died of blunt force trauma to the head. During the autopsy, the pathologist also obtained a sexual assault kit, took swabbings, and submitted the kit for forensic investigation. Carolyn Booker, a DNA analyst with the Acadia Crime Lab, visualized semen in the vaginal swabbings and obtained a DNA profile. The profile was consistent with the DNA profile generated in Green, Pace, and the Kinnamore murders. Lastly, on March 3, 2003, Lee Ellis Stanton reported his girlfriend, Carrie Yoder, a beautiful 26-year-old graduate student at LSU, disappeared from her home near campus. Stanton reported that he entered the residence through an unlocked window. After entering the residence, he discovered the front door unlocked. Other than a key holder that was askew, a broken necklace, and a small amount of blood on Yoder's purse, there was no indication of a struggle at Yoder's residence. After days of searching, a commercial fisherman found Yoder's body on March 13, 2003, partially submerged at Whiskey Bay, not far from where Kinnamore's body had been found. Upon forensic examination and a complete autopsy, it was determined Yoder was raped, strangled, beaten, and stomped. A sexual assault kit was utilized during the autopsy, and a complete DNA profile was obtained from the vaginal washings. The DNA profile was consistent with the DNA profiles obtained in the Green, Pace, Kinnamore, and Colombe murders. At trial, evidence was presented that showed the defendant used a prepaid cell phone on March 3, 2003, 3 times at approximately 2 p.m. at locations within less than 10 miles of Whiskey Bay, the place where Yoder's body had been found. Although the forensic evidence pointed to a single killer, the police had no match of this DNA profile to anyone that was electronically filed in the databases maintained on either the local, state, or national levels. Accordingly, the task force continued its investigation, following leads turned in, and obtained hundreds of voluntary DNA swabbings. The task force expanded its search beyond looking for a white male in a white pickup truck because a Florida forensic lab had determined from several rare markers in the DNA that might suggest the suspect was African American. Accordingly, on May 22, 2003, Diane Alexander again met with Detective Boyd of the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Office. She reviewed the sketch that was first produced from her description of her black assailant and modified it only to adjust the hairline to show a razor edge. Eventually, a suspect was identified as a black male. Once that black male had been taken into custody, buccal or cheek swabs were taken. Later, the police identified the suspect as having a match with the DNA swabs taken from the 5 victims. The suspect named was Derrick Todd Lee, originally from St. Francisville, Louisiana, just north of Baton Rouge. When detectives, members of the FBI, and surrounding sheriff's departments got wind of the identification, they immediately moved to arrest Lee. However, when they went to his residence, they learned that he had fled the state and went to Atlanta, Georgia, where he had relatives living at the time. Once in custody in Georgia, Lee gave a blood sample and a DNA sample. Suspect Lee matched the blood profile, and so Louisiana law enforcement authorities took him into custody for the journey to face justice. Lee was tried in August 2004 for the murder of Geraldine DeSoto, who was found dead in her home in Adas, Louisiana. DeSoto had been stabbed numerous times. DeSoto's husband was the primary suspect, but DNA evidence creating a possible link to Lee was discovered as the murder investigation progressed. Although eligible for first-degree murder charges, the district attorney elected to try Lee for murder in the second degree, since DeSoto was not sexually assaulted, and thus a first-degree murder conviction would be harder to obtain. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the benefit of parole. One of Lee's victims is believed to have been Mary Ann Fowler, wife of former Louisiana Elections Commissioner Jerry M. Fowler. Mrs. Fowler was abducted on Christmas Eve 2002 from a sandwich shop in Port Allen in West Baton Rouge Parish. She was never found and was declared legally dead in 2004. Lee was convicted on October 14, 2004 from the May 31, 2002 rape and murder of LSU graduate student Charlotte Murray Pace. Lee was sentenced to die by lethal injection, and he currently resides on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary.
At the end of the narration of this episode, we informed you that Derrick Todd Lee was awaiting on death row. Unfortunately, he did not meet the fate of the executioner. On or about January 23, 2016, Lee complained about having problems with his pacemaker. Immediately rushed to a local hospital, he expired at approximately 9 a.m. that morning of heart failure. With Lee's death, questions were never answered as to whether he may have been responsible for other murders at the time. Therefore, victims' families did not walk away with any closure whatsoever. To be sure, Lee did meet his maker. Now, whether it was the way the victims' families desired, he still paid for his crimes. As an historical footnote, a shooting took place in East Feliciana Parish, where a young black man had been murdered with a gunshot wound. The person of interest later became the number one suspect in the case. Meet DERRICK Lee, son of the infamous and unrepentant serial killer Derrick Todd Lee. As of this broadcast, there has been no disposition in the case, but young Lee was granted bail and remains free until his trial. Now, if you'd like to contribute to the program, please look us up on Buy Me a Cup of Coffee or PayPal, and thanks for being here. Until next time.